Welcome to Undercover Analyst. The world's biggest company in terms of market share lost $200 billion in valuation in just a couple of days. And this stock is the Apple Inc. The stock has been in a free fall for a week and has been down like 6%, as you can see here. So what really happened that Apple has lost about 200 billion of market cap? And will there be like further selling coming up, or what's the outlook of Apple? So, what's the news? So, China plans to expand a ban on the use of iPhones, and this ban is now going to cover the government backed agencies and state companies. So, which means that the government backed agencies and state companies will not be allowing any employees using iPhones. Now, this is a big news because Apple is the biggest component in major US equity indexes, and because of that, the fall in Apple has actually triggered a fall in the US market overall. The iPhone maker counts China as its biggest foreign market and global production base. And already there was fear in the US because of the US Treasury yields. It was rising, and the Federal Reserve is already in a fight against inflation from past many months. And this will impact the overall revenues of Apple. That's what the analysts say. Apple's growth story is heavily reliant on China. And if Beijing crackdown intensifies and they continue like that, banning iPhones and Apple products in certain places in China, then we can see a big problem for the mega tech companies in the US and also the companies which are heavily reliant on Apple's production in China. And that's the reason why the Apple shares fell by around 6%, and there was a market cap erosion of $200 billion. Let's try to understand what exactly this is. So if you see the Nasdaq 100 index, and it was trading like 2.6% down for the week, and this was a week when the news broke out. So you can see a clear indication of there is a fear about uh, Apple being able to meet its future earnings as far as China is concerned. The news is having a widespread effect on the markets, and now with investors selling everything from chips, mega cap technologies, to US listed Chinese stocks as well. And if you see the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, it's been down like 3% in a week's time. So this is an indication of where the market believes that this could impact the semiconductor companies as well as the companies which can be said to be providing raw materials to Apple for the use in iPhone or iPad. So what exactly is the China problem? The United States and China have taken steps to reduce their economic reliance on each other. So what's happening is that US and China have been in a trade war for past many years now, since the Trump administration. What China wants is that they don't want to rely on the Western tech companies to build their technological economy. And because of that, they just want to now alienate itself from the complete reliance on the U.S. tech companies. At the same time, the U.S. thinks that there are security concerns over investment and trade coming in from China. The American companies think that there has been a risk related to national securities over Chinese companies and technology companies in China, which have been using the chips from United States. The world's biggest economy has been suffering already in the real estate market, and what is happening is the real estate market problems are now, threatening to affect everything from commodities to consumer electronics in China. Now, this bad news can have a major problem for iPhone in the American market because Apple is heavily reliant on the Chinese market because $74 billion of revenue alone comes from China. We'll have a look at that later. This ban on iPhone could be a big problem for the American companies, not only Apple, but also the small little companies like semiconductor providers, semiconductor makers, the semiconductor assembly lines. All those small companies can be heavily hit by this news. And we already saw that in the semiconductor index, which was down like 3%. Shenzhen-based Huawei Technologies could be another big reason why China has banned Apple iPhones for government agencies. The thing is that Huawei is about to launch a Mate 60 Pro smartphone, which costs about $1,200, but iPhone already has a big market share in China, so maybe this is the right time to curb the use of iPhone, which is enforced by the Chinese government, and promote the Huawei smartphone so that Huawei can make um, a prominent market share in the Chinese market. So this could be one reason which the analysts are pointing out. But just before that, just a quick reminder, if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe if you like the content which I make. Let's have a look at the financials of Apple. Now, I've pulled out the annual report for 2022, and you see clearly that $74.2 billion of revenue for Apple comes from China. And that forms like a major part because no company is as big as China when it comes to iPhone sales, apart from America, of course. But so this forms a substantial part of the revenue. And you see the total net sales of $394 billion. And out of that, 74 comes from China. So it obviously is a big market for iPhone. And if market share of Apple goes down in China because of this news, it could have a severe impact on the sales and hence the net profit of Apple. What we see here is the net sales from China and the operating income from China. So that will considerably decrease in case if this ban goes ahead, and the investors are fearing that maybe this is not the last ban which we see. There could be more bans coming in from China because China really wants to alienate itself from the technological advances which they are going to make, and they just don't want to rely on the United States anymore. So here is a rough estimate of how much revenue loss can happen to Apple because of this ban. So I just found out the number of government employees in China. That is like 56 million. And what I did was market share of iPhone in China is 23%. So let's say the government employees using iPhone could be somewhere around 13 million users. The average price of iPhone in China is $650. So if I multiply this 13 million figure with 650, which is the cost of one iPhone in China on an average, uh, that makes a revenue of around 8 billion, 8.5 billion approximately. So what I predict is there could be a revenue loss of 8.5 billion. Uh, and what we see the market cap of Apple is around $2.9 trillion. With that estimate, there could be a probable market cap loss of about 64 billion. But what we saw was market cap loss of 200 billion. So why is that the investors are dumping the Apple stock more than expected? The reason is they think that this is not the first and the last ban. This ban could extend to other sectors in China in order for Huawei to take a dominant market share in the Chinese market. So this calculation is just a rough estimate and it's based on uh, 2021 figures. So I could not say this is very accurate, but still it gives you a rough idea that there could be an $8.5 billion loss in the revenue of China. So the ban also sent a chill through the Western companies operating in China generally, as they now are questioning how welcome the foreign firms are in China. So even as some Chinese officials stress that China is back open for business after the worst of the COVID-19 is over, police raids on foreign firms and anti-espionage laws being applied on American firms. Now, all these stuff actually underscore the difficulty of doing business and accessing information in China. The latest restriction on iPhone could add to doubts about doing business in China, especially the California-based tech giant. Until recently, they had a good relationship with Beijing. All these issues already being highlighted by the media in case of China. Now, this ban would raise a lot of questions and doubts about the Chinese government's intention of building a self-reliant technological economy. And maybe they have started to promote the local players by stepping up on trade war with the US. So that's what the analysts actually think. Talking about Huawei, the US government said that they are already investigating the new smartphone of Huawei, and national security advisors have been looking into the matter for more information about precisely its character and composition. So when it comes to the United States, they are skeptical about the smartphones from China, and maybe this could be like a counter from China to ban iPhone from the Chinese market. The US is also concerned about whether the Huawei company has bypassed American restrictions on semiconductor exports to create the new chip. So we all know that there's an ongoing chip war going on between the United States and China. I mean, that's a big long story, which is not possible to cover in this video. But because of that chip war, China wants to, now be a self-reliant technological economy, and right now they are totally dependent upon the United States for chips and semiconductors, and they want to change that. And maybe this is the start of that. If the Chinese administration goes ahead with the ban of the use of iPhones and other foreign branded devices by government officials, this may have a cascading effect on several other US technology companies. Across continents, Apple suppliers were trading lower for the week as multiple reports confirmed China's latest changes. There's another side of the story. This comes from an analyst who says the iPhone ban in China is just a bit overblown, citing it may not affect much the company's revenue. And he says there's only 500,000 iPhones that could be I mean, the sale of 500,000 iPhones that could be impacted. Apple sells about 45 million of those, so it's not going to be big. It's just that if only 500,000 iPhone sales will be affected over the next 12 months, then this would not be a big news. But the only problem is that the investors are thinking that this is just the start of the dangerous trade war between US and China, which has already shown a lot of problems in other sectors. So Apple's growth story is heavily reliant on China, and if Beijing crackdown intensifies, this problem could, take another step, and it will not be good for the tech companies which are supporting Apple, as well as the tech companies which are the American tech companies which are there in China. If you like this video, please share, subscribe,